its shame and reproach gladly bear. Then he'll call me someday to my home so far away, where his glory forever I share. So I cherish the old rugged roads till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for the
Well, I'd like to say thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. The family's very grateful for everybody's love and support. My name is Ron Miller. Some of you know me as Chip. Chip off the old block, in fact. And Dad and I actually had shirts one year on vacation. I have to tell you, mine said Chip off the old block. This said the old block. And, folks, every place we went, everybody loved those shirts, and I'm sorry we didn't just keep doing it every year, because I would have loved to have had a collection of those. First of all, before I forget, I have to tell you the beautiful music you just heard was actually a childhood friend of Dad's, Bill Barker. They went to Navy together, were friends all the rest of their life. Dad was blessed to have some very good friends that have been around for years and years and years. I won't say how many: Bob Ayler, Jack Cashman. They've been, Dad was very blessed to have such good and true friends with him on his journey through life. Just a kind of a word of explanation. You're going to wind up hearing me blubber a little bit while I'm up here today. And I'll also say, I've never been like in the pulpit of a church like this. And so I haven't burst into flames yet, and everything's okay. So we could talk about it later, Kevin, and but Dad retired from the state police in 1995, and I had never been to a state police retirement party, and so we went, and I remember, they were going through all this stuff, and people were getting up and speaking and everything, and then towards the end of the thing, the guy that was the MC looked over at me and he said, "Chip, you have anything you'd like to say, about your dad or anything else?" And I was like a deer caught in the headlights. And I just sat there, and I remember I panicked for 10 or 15 seconds, and then I just shook my head. And since 1995, I've regretted the fact that I did not get up at that retirement party and say what a great guy he was. So today, I'm going to do it. So anyway, there we go. First blubbering moment. Many of you know Dad was born in 1940 in August, in Kentucky, a little town in southeast Kentucky. My grandfather was a mine inspector at the time. And right after Dad's older brother, Daryl, graduated from high school, the family moved to Indianapolis. My grandfather did not want either of the boys to work in the mines. Oddly enough, my grandfather made great money as a mine inspector. I think Mom was saying the other night he was making like $500 a week in the 50s, and took a massive pay cut to come work at Chrysler in Indianapolis. But moved the family up here, and Dad went to Arsenal Tech High School, graduated in 1959. Mom jokingly said one day that he was more familiar with the inside of pool halls than he was classrooms. And Dad kind of chided her a little bit and said, "Don't tell him that, Phyllis, don't tell him that." And then he kind of laughed and he said, "Yeah, she's right." And so what he didn't get in book learning necessarily, he made up for with a lot of common sense and a lot of wisdom, a lot of street smarts. And that served him well through the rest of his life. Three of his best lifelong friendships were developed during those years. Bill Barker, who you heard, unfortunately is not with us any longer. Don Lifford, who is no longer with us. His wife Maxine is, though. We're glad to have you. And Bob Ayler. And those guys hung out. Unfortunately, we had a slideshow. Well, we had a slideshow at the visitation the other night, so there wasn't really a whole lot that changed. But there's some great pictures of Bill and Bob and Don and Dad just hanging out and being silly. He was much the better for having those friendships. Dad got involved with things like ROTC and was interested in the Navy. And so guess what? A bunch of those guys all signed up for the Navy. So he, I think he and Bill were on the same ship. Is that right? Okay. Yep. Mom's fortunately sitting in the front, so she can correct anything I say that's a little too heavily embellished. Dad was assigned to the William Wood. It was a destroyer that spent time over the Med. They did some stuff in the Atlantic and everything too. And it was during those years, he actually ran the ship's post office. And there happened to be another guy in the fleet who ran the ship's post office on the Steinecker, who was Jack Cashman, another one of the friends that Dad made and created a lifelong bond with. And Dad always laughed. He said Jack's facility for the postal duties on the Steinecker was always neat and tidy and freshly painted. He said, I think he characterized his as just much more functional, which I think meant it was a mess. Keep in mind, this was a guy that hemmed pants with a stapler. He did teach me how to do that, by the way. It's one of those sort of superhero skills that I have. I can hem pants with a stapler. There's a lot you can fix with a stapler and a piece of tape. Fortunately, the mic is hooked on with tape, not staples. So that worked out well for me today. But we were really pleased, and I just have to say kind of an extra word. Jack was part of the American Legion Honor Guard yesterday at the cemetery. Beautiful ceremony, and we're very honored that he was able to make the trip over from Ohio and be with us really this whole week. It's been nice. So Dad finished his active duty in 1962. He actually had kind of a short-term job at Indiana Gear. Funny story about this, he was offered a job at Eli Lilly, which he turned down so that he could accept an appointment to the state police. Dad and I joked about this years later because he probably, out of all of those years, if he joined Lilly in '62, he probably would have retired as vice president of something. Instead, he had a career in law enforcement, which wasn't quite as lucrative, let me just say. That career spanned 33 years, though. He started out at the Seymour Post. He was in Bartholomew and Jackson counties. Got promoted to sergeant. Went to Bloomington. Was assigned to Morgan County. That's how we wound up here in Martinsville all those years ago. And had quite a varied career, eventually winding up at Putnamville as the first sergeant. And he had, like I said, a lot of varied experiences. He often characterized it. He said law enforcement, police work was like any other job. It was about 95% doldrum, boredom, and nothing really happening. It was all routine. And then 5% about unbridled terror because you had no idea what was going to happen. All the stories from those years, and there are too many to share today, absolutely too many. Some were funny, some were tragic, some were just interesting. He just enjoyed that job. He loved working the road. He loved interacting with people. Just a couple, I will share a couple of these because I think they're kind of humorous. You might not find them so amusing. Back in those days, police agencies were very thinly staffed, and it was not unusual at all. Wasn't unusual at all when Dad was working nights, for example. He would be the only police officer in 2 or 3 counties that was actually on duty. And what that meant was, one, you had no help, and two, you got called out a lot because when something big happened, they needed more people out. And so it was a frequent occurrence when I was growing up. The phone would ring at 2 in the morning. You knew it was the post calling. You knew you had to get ready and go to work. Sometimes they only got home for 2 hours. And there were many days and many nights that he probably worked 20 hours in that day, just all in the service of the people of Indiana. Mom tells a story that actually is kind of, I think, humorous now, probably wasn't at the time, and probably a lot of people would be shocked that he and a bunch of his fellow troopers had gone out to celebrate something, and he rolled in late at night, as I'm sure all the other troopers did. They probably enjoyed the celebration a little too much, if you know what I mean. And he'd been home about an hour, and the phone rang, and it was the post, and they said he needed to be called out. Mom kind of argued with the guy on the phone. She's like, "No, you know those guys aren't in any shape to go back out. You know where they've been at. You're pulling my leg. You're being funny about this." He goes, "No, really." So Dad got up, answered the phone, put his uniform on, and away he went with another one of the troopers that he worked that county with. And so in the morning, they hadn't been home yet, and nobody had checked in, and the wife of the other officer called Mom and said, "Have you heard from them? Do you have any idea what's going on?" And Mom said, "No, they're not home yet." And she's like, "Well, I don't think he was in any shape to go back out last night. How was Ronnie?" And Mom said, "Well, not any better, I'm sure." Turns out there'd been a bank robbery, and they had to stand a roadblock all night, which not only in that kind of condition, but not feeling good and having been up all day already, certainly something that was sort of customary at the time. There were a lot of close calls that he had over the years. He always took them in stride. I guess we did too. At least I did. I don't know, Mom, did you? It was just kind of another day. He had one incident. Mom was recounting the other day. He was working the National Drags, and there'd been a scuffle. And of course, the National Drags, for those of you who know or don't know, used to be kind of a wild, woolly event. Happened out in Claremont, Indiana. Dad worked that. He worked the fair. He worked the 500. I mean, those were all duties that he had. But there was a scuffle, and he put a guy in handcuffs and was walking him through the crowd back to the command trailer because the guy was going to jail. And apparently the guy had a buddy who thought that wasn't such a good idea and pulled a gun out and actually put it up to Dad's back because he was going to shoot him. In those days, they didn't wear vests or anything. And another trooper saw it and pulled out his baton and threw it and hit the guy, knocked the gun out of his hand, actually knocked him down. And Dad had no idea that this happened until he turned around and saw the guy laying there on the ground with the gun. Just one of those instances you didn't come home and he talks about it and he said, "Oh, this happened." Oh my gosh. And over those years, there were two in particular. There were a lot of car chases, a lot of things like that, a lot of interesting situations, but there were two that really came to mind. One happened in the 70s. Big multi-agency car chase. I think Dad was the lead chaser, if you will. This was one of those that was like perfect for the cinema. You know, there were guys running off the road and, you know, police cars getting banged up and all of that. And when they finally got the guy stopped in downtown Martinsville, Dad actually had a tire on his car that had started shredding the rubber and was throwing the rubber up over the roof of the car. He probably couldn't have gone on much longer, to be honest, because that tire wouldn't have lasted. But they caught the guy, and we had a heck of a time getting the rubber off the roof of that car for the next inspection. He had another one that wasn't quite as cinematic in the 80s when my best friend Jeff, who's here, right there, he and I both worked at Fairbanks Hospital, and we carpooled, worked the evening shift up there. We came home, and it was, I don't know, probably close to midnight when we pulled in Mom and Dad's driveway. Dad had been working special patrol, and should have been home. And I'm like, that's odd, his car's not in the driveway. And so we learned a valuable lesson that night, my family, and that was you always give the good news first. You don't go through the elaborate build-up. And Mom met us in the driveway, and first words were, he's okay, he's okay. And then she said, he doesn't look too great, but he's okay. So we go in, he was real banged up, his eyes swollen shut, multiple injuries. I think he broke his thumb. I don't think the hospital ever did, but sprained his wrist, and his knee was jacked up a little bit. And what had happened, he was out on 67 and a drunk driver nearly rear-ended him. He gave chase. The drunk driver turned into Martinsville, was zooming along at a high rate of speed, and a van had parked illegally right before Main Street, and it obscured the stop sign. It would have told you that you were coming up on the big street. So Saturday night, Martinsville, which doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot, but it was busy. The drunk skidded through the intersection and made it and regained control of his car and kept going. Dad wasn't so lucky. He skidded into the intersection and collided head-on with the car. Carried him out into a yard, actually. I think they hit a porch of a house right there on Main Street. And he said, he broke his steering wheel off with the one hand, and he upended a console in the middle of the car where they had the radios. And he said, boy, it just got real quiet. He said, I was just sitting there, and he said, the red light on my dash was still going around. It's connected to the battery. And he goes, everything just was quiet. And then he said it went dark because he cut his forehead and the blood ran down in his face. So anyway, he had bruises across where his seatbelt was. I mean, he was kind of a mess, but very interesting experience, and truly one that I think he kind of joked later. He said, I kind of feel like some of this police work is for the younger guys. And I don't know what you think, Mom. I think that probably made him start thinking about retirement more so than anything. And he had told me because of the undiagnosed injury to his thumb, he had some issues with the service weapon, and he wasn't entirely convinced that he was as useful as he had been before. He works on other big cases, the Ann Harmeyer disappearance. He worked a lot on that. And I remember one night we were in the car and there was some radio traffic going on and everything, and he looked at me and he said, do you know what a Buick Delta 88 looks like? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, let's go watch for some traffic. There's a tip. And so we pulled into a crossover there on 37, and we sat for about 20 minutes just watching the cars go by, hoping to spot this car that I don't know where it was at or where it was coming from, but anyway, nothing ever transpired there. And it also got a picture, unfortunately, but from the reporter in 1979, who worked with Terry Lee Chastain murder. And to some extent, I have to say, Dad had this philosophy that there was a little bit of good and redeeming quality in everybody. We never really asked, but he never really quite got over that whole horrible scene. 3 little kids killed with their mother. The newspaper clipping actually it's not a bad picture of Dad. He was wearing his duty jacket, he had his mustache and all that, but he was loading the victims on an ambulance. And we never really talked too much about the impact of all of that, but I have to think it was significant on him, and I don't know if he would have necessarily agreed that Steve and Judy had a little bit of good redeeming quality in him after all of that. Following his retirement in 1985, Dad worked to start his own business for a little while. He worked for my uncle for a little while. And ultimately, he wound up at American Transair. That's the significance of the airplanes back there on the table. He did that for about 10 years before he actually retired for good. It was kind of funny, ATA, as many of you know, sort of foundered around and went under. During that time, Mom had already given her notice that she was going to retire from the bank, and Dad said he was just going to wait and give his 2 weeks because he figured they'd tell him he could leave that day. And instead what happened was they called him into a conference room and they said, well, we're actually going to eliminate your position. So unfortunately, you're being, it's reduction in force, you're being riffed out. And he sat there and he looked at him and he said, okay. And the HR guy's like, do you have any questions? And you want to talk about this? He goes, nope. And he got up and went back to his office. He'd already been packing. He just hadn't said anything. And so he just pulls a box out from under the desk and it already had his coffee cup and, personal effects and everything. And he said, no, it's totally fine with me. So he was able to draw unemployment because he had been laid off. And the joke ultimately wound up being on ATA after all that because Dad got this extra little kick for the full amount of his unemployment. And we chuckled about that one a lot too. He said, boy, they were really amazed, just go back and pull this box out from under my desk, and he was ready to go out to the parking lot. He was all done. And so he got his wish, he got his retirement. But he and Mom traveled, they enjoyed their time with friends, enjoyed time with family, did things around the house. Unfortunately, I think there's still a lot of projects Mom was pointing out that need to be done. So as Laura and Melinda, my lovely cousins from Maryland, can tell you, I'm not the best with the saw or home improvement project. They actually not only have been out here to support us, and Laura was at the hospital with Mom kind of around the clock and sort of helping out, but they put a new floor in our spare bedroom and closet. It looks amazing. So I don't know if you guys have any cards or anything, but if anybody needs some home repair work, they're leaving tomorrow, but they'll be back, I'm sure. So we'll get you hooked up. Mom and Dad were always together in those years. I know some of those years when he was working an odd schedule, she was working days, they probably just saw each other in passing. But after retirement, they went everywhere together. And there were times I'd call the house at like 10 p.m. and nobody would answer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, It's like start calling cell phones, and eventually they pick up one of the two. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Oh, we came out, we're getting gas in the car and, doing this and that. We're just out running errands. And so they were frequent attendees at volleyball games, at school events, band concerts, you name it. And in fact, my younger daughter, Leona, right here, played volleyball in college. She was at Cedarville. And Dad loved nothing more than to hook up actually had to buy him a longer HDMI cable. He would hook up his computer, plug it into this obscenely long HDMI cable so that he could live stream the volleyball games that they were doing. And he and Mom could sit in their recliners and be more comfortable. Up to that point, they'd pull chairs in from the kitchen and sat, or they'd watch it on the little laptop screen. So we got them all hooked up on that, and they loved watching those games and cheering along. Mom would start texting, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, they're up a game, they're this, they're that." It was all exciting. It was just like we were all there together, and they just always had time for family events, family birthdays. Always the two people you could count on to come for something, to show up. Even when Dad wasn't feeling good, he and Mom came out for Grandparents' Day for Amanda just a few weeks ago at her elementary school, and she had a good time with them there, and they had a good time and really enjoyed that opportunity. So I'm going to take a little break for a second. I've got more comments and more remarks, but Kevin, or do we have another song? I think. Yeah, another song, and then we'll let Kevin get up and say a few words here, and maybe lead us in a prayer, do some scripture, or whatever you'd like to do. And then I'll be back, unfortunately, for y'all to do.
share.
Thank you, Sheriff. They asked me to share yesterday, so some of you gathered at the Nebo little location where we had the entombment. I spoke yesterday to that smaller audience, and I'm honored to be able to share a little bit. And I do want to share a scripture and then make some remarks. Phyllis and I sat down this last week, and she told me some things that I think you need to know about that match what Ron has already said and that haven't been disclosed from yesterday, so if you'll bear with me. I think behind the scenes, you have to know that Ronnie Miller was a man of faith. Somewhere in his life, and I believe early on, he probably heard this passage: there is a time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die. I bet he learned that early, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Time to plant, time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal, time to tear down, a time to build, a time to weep, a time to laugh. You've probably done some of that this past week. Time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to scatter stones, a time to gather them up, a time to embrace, a time to refrain, a time to search, and a time to give up, time to keep, time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to mend, or use a stapler, a time to be silent. That's hard for a preacher. And a time to speak, time to love, a time to hate, time for war, time for peace. I bet you've heard that. You heard it early. It's the foundation of life that we have almost every one of those seasons in our life. But there's a verse after that well-known passage that I really appreciate. In verse 12 it speaks, I know there is nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live. What a powerful verse that is. Sometimes I think we preachers make following, believing in God, following His Son Jesus harder than it is supposed to be. But I think there's nothing better for man or woman to be happy and to do good while they live. And you've heard that from Ron. Happy and doing good what he was gifted at doing. Time to be born and time to die. I don't know about you, but in my life, I've seen those two times really closer together all the time. There's a little dash between there. It's just quicker. Let me roll through some of the things he's spoken. You know already he was born in 1940. Ron became a son and a brother, born August 25th, 1940, in Benham, Kentucky, to the late William and Ruby Miller. But you may not know that Phyllis shared with me, Ron's oldest brother, William A. Miller, died shortly after birth. It's been said when a parent loses their child, they lose their future. And you would have thought at that early time, those parents would have said, what do we have to live for? And then God, in His time, creates another season where there's another son, an older brother, David Darrell, better known as Darrell, and Darrell's wife is here today. Was born next and soon followed Ron Miller. They grew up in eastern Kentucky, Harlan County. If you know that area, it's a little economically depressed and has been since the 40s, maybe before that. And so we probably have to ask Daryl's wife, to tell us about that early time, and Phyllis as well. And to hear the stories of that little community there in East Kentucky that in the 40s shaped who he became as a man. You know, the hard things we go through tend to make us a better person when we come to that day we die. But one of the best things I think that Ron got in those early days of Kentucky was an introduction to Jesus.
Amen.
Thursday night when I was over with Phyllis and just reminiscing and talking at the visitation, she told me that Ron has a picture of his baptism down in Kentucky where he's about the age of 11 or 12. And someone in the 40s took a picture of that baptism, and he looks at that and he says, probably, that's me in the striped shirt. What a great memory and what a great visual to have a sacred moment that you can recall where you first learned of God and chose to follow Jesus. There's nothing greater you can do for a family member than to introduce them to Jesus. I'm going to suggest, based on what Phyllis shares about 1953, they moved to Indianapolis. That's the second great gift they gave this family. Ronnie and Daryl got to go to Indianapolis, but I want you to know, moving is hard. I'm a preacher's kid. I moved 4 times in my life, and I hated every time I moved. I was the new kid on the block, and that's what the phrase you said about Ron. He was the new kid on the block. I had to make new friends. And then I loved what she said. She said, there in Indianapolis, he rode his bike, and he had his baseball mitt, and he made friends with Bo. I don't know about you, but when you told me that, I got to kind of thinking of the 40s and the 50s, and that movie Sandlot came to mind. How many of you have seen that? I mean, I can identify that. I grew up in the 60s, and that's the way I lived. But there was a bunch of kids that played baseball, knocked it over a fence, and there's a big dog who slobbered up the ball. And there's that great quote in that movie, "You're killing me, Smalls." I just kind of thought, who in his circle of friends that you identified, and there were the names Bob Ayler, Bill Ayler, and he's here today. There's Jack. There's others that they mentioned by name, Bill, who sang the song. And they became close friends. One of my favorite definition of a friend is someone who knows everything about you and loves you just the same. You love me, but you know it. And Ronnie, he told you his dad loved to not only play baseball, but bowl, play pool, and these friends loved to do it so much that they exceeded the number of excused absences permitted at the high school in that time. And that close friendship probably cost him an extra year of his life to finish and become a graduate in 1959. Arsenal Tech, Indianapolis. But those friends meant the world to Ron, so much that they enlisted in the Navy together. Ron and Bill on the same ship. So some of those friends literally went to war together. And I don't know about you, to come from a small town and to come out of life, and especially high school and as a young adult, to have 1 or 2 close friends like that, that's a priceless treasure. 1960, Ron enlists as a U.S. Navy serviceman, serves on that fleet. President Truman, former president, said our debt to the heroic men and valiant women in the service of our country can never be repaid. They have earned our undying gratitude, and America will never forget their sacrifices. Yesterday, we gathered in that location, and the local American Legion gave Ron a 21-gun salute. It was kind of unannounced that was going on. When those guns went off, we all kind of jumped, did we not? But then we recognized what was going on, and then we heard the taps. And then we saw the veterans come in and take the flag off the casket and fold it and present it to Phyllis as keepsake in honor of Ron's service to God in this country. And so we learned there's one more American veteran soldier, Ronnie Miller, who deserves our undying thanks. 1962, Ron becomes a police officer. I can't improve on what you've heard, but I did ask the question, think in my mind, why would anybody want to be a police officer? And when Phyllis told me, as I sat at her table on Tuesday, she asked him the same thing. And he said to her, I like to help people. And you've heard the stories of how he had oversight of multiple counties, sometime himself. Think about it. You had somebody protecting you in the middle of the night against some kind of possible evil, and you never knew. What a great thing to know. Someone made this statement, being a state trooper does not make you a man, but being a state trooper reveals what kind of man you are. That's the kind of man we celebrate today. 1963, Ron became a husband. Phyllis told me this little story. I hope I can relay it as accurately as she did. She said, my sister Peggy worked at Standard Groceries. Ron worked at Standard Groceries for a while. I worked at another Standard Groceries store. But Peggy said, hey, there's this really nice guy at the store I work with. You ought to go out with him. Phyllis said, I'm okay with that, but I've got to see what he looks like. Meanwhile, and I think you told me the name Mike said to Ron, there's this really nice guy at the other Standard store. You ought to go meet and go out with her. And apparently Ron said, I'm okay with that, but I got to see what she looks like. So one day when Ron was picking up his pay for Standard's grocery store, Peggy arranged for Phyllis to be within a short distance to see Ron get the cash he earned for his work. Phyllis said, boy, he's good looking. But you know what? They didn't have a chance in that encounter to actually talk to each other. He went away without even looking. Opportunity lost, but persistence pays. Eventually, Ron and Phyllis met. They clicked. Ron started working with the Indiana State Police on August 9th, 1963. They got married, and that was 59 years ago.
Wow.
What a great thing to have a model of two people who love each other until death.
Amen.
There's an old kids chorus. I don't know if you ever heard my mother sing this. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before. Every day with Jesus, I love him more and more. When Phyllis was telling me about reaching that 59th anniversary, she said the next day, she said to Ron, 59 plus 1. Then the next day she said 59 plus 2. And every day with Ron was sweeter than the day before. And the one who wrote this obituary put it this way: he shared a rich, fulfilling, and happy 59 years of marriage. Somebody must have been watching this couple along the way. I assume that's true. What a great thing to witness that and then write that and proclaim that. And soon Ron became the father to Ronnie Lee Chip Miller. Now, there's no way I can improve on what he has shared. I'm not going to try. But Ron also became a grandfather to Sarma, Leanna, and Amanda. Great-grandfather to Syra, that host, and Zintas. Ron was a brother-in-law, an uncle. He had every kind of relationship that you can have that fulfilled his life. But at this point, let me just say, from 1963 to 2022, how do you describe a man who built a wonderful life with his family? The obit had two statements. He was resilient, stoic, and quiet with a wry sense of humor and unmatched wisdom and common sense. What a great thing to have. All the known life of this family. And the second obit comment is this: Ron was a man of faith, devotion, patience, and integrity. I can attest to that second statement. Let me try to prove my point. In my lifetime, I've seen Ron's devotion to God and his son Jesus from a distance. When I was a teenager, college student, and a young adult on my own, I would often come back to my home church, Liberty Christian Church here in Martinsville. My dad was the preacher there, and during that ministry time there, the Miller family worshiped God and served in that kingdom work there. In the 70s, my dad was the preacher. Ron and Phyllis were the young couples at that time with a young son being brought to church. Phyllis will tell you that she was baptized by my dad. Chip told me a couple years ago that he was baptized by my dad with his parents' guidance. And one of the greatest things you can do is pass on your faith to the next generation, to your family and your friends. In the 1990s, somehow I became the preacher at Liberty Christian. And guess who was there? Ron and Phyllis Miller. They supported me. At that time, I was a young preacher in my 30s, early 40s, and I was wet behind the ears. And yet they were just great encouragement. My dad retired. He moved back to Martinsville, became the preacher at Centennial Christian Church. If you just go down this road to the first church on the right, that's Centennial Christian Church. My dad was a preacher there for 14 years. I moved to Florida. And there was a season of life that it was just right to go and support and work with my dad at Centennial Christian Church. And Ron and Phyllis were backbone people there working in that small church. And Phyllis really was the children's director. She led kids' church almost all those years. 2004, River Valley Christian Church started. 2005, my dad came from Centennial Church to help work with River Valley, where you're worshiping here today. Ron and Phyllis stayed at Centennial until it was a right time for them to come join us. And in 2016, they officially joined our church with a confession of Christ and said, we'll serve wherever you are needed. And within a year, we had a need in one of our most significant roles of the church. We had a change in treasury. We needed somebody with integrity and faith that we trusted. And so the elders and myself appealed to Ron and Phyllis to lead that area. And I just want you to know they've done that admirably together to this very day. And so I've seen this man of faith. I've seen this man of high integrity, and I want to praise him. One of the things you might not know is that Ron will do the little things too. Phyllis has often been involved in the local community effort called Weekday Religious Education, which is teaching kids the Bible and about Jesus. And I believe she shared that Mickey Elliott, longtime teacher there, needed a little bit of help. And so she asked Phyllis if she would assist. And that assisting was supposed to last 3 or 4 weeks. Turned into 3 or 4 months. And so last year, when that was needed post-COVID, they found another need where we just need more help moving the kids from the school to the local building where they taught, which I think was a church. And you know who volunteered to supervise the kids, walk with the kids? It was none other than Ronnie Miller. And I just get to thinking, why would he, when he was battling cancer, want to take on that job? And I just think, I can protect, I can watch, I can guide. I got that kind of faith when I was that age. And so I just think he was a man of faith, a man of integrity, and he got that all the way back to those hard days in Kentucky. And many in this community have benefited from overcoming that law. You see, at an early age, I believe Ron heard Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And maybe he put it together that if you have trouble with the first verse of the Bible, you'll have trouble with the rest of the book. He didn't have trouble with it. He knew there was a God. At an early age, I believe Ron heard John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. And I think he thought the greatest person was God. The greatest motive is love. The greatest gift is the one and only Son, Jesus. The greatest condition is you do have to believe. And the greatest hope is you get eternal life when you do. Ron believed. And I think that at an early age, down in Kentucky, Ron heard that Jesus asked his disciples, who do you say I am? And Peter was the first to blurt this out. I believe you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And at an early age, he must have said that. And then followed that up with the baptism. Phyllis told me that in just the last couple of weeks at St. Francis Hospital, it was Christmas Eve. Unfortunately, Christmas Eve was not a good day or night for Ron. But Phyllis said, I asked him, do you know what day it is? Ron said, yeah, it's Christmas Eve. Phyllis asked, whose birthday are you celebrating? Ron said, Jesus. And then Phyllis said, well, who is Jesus to you? And Ron's words were, he's my Lord and Savior. And Phyllis just said to me, I just wanted to hear him say that one more time. What a great foundational truth to carry you through all of life and even on death's door. At an early age, I'm sure he heard the Great Commission, go into all the world, preach the gospel, whoever believes and is baptized. Ron got dumped in that river in Kentucky. And at an early age, I bet he also heard Ecclesiastes 12:1. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you say, I find no pleasure in them. Remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered in the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and before the dust returns to the ground from which it came, and the spirit returns to God who made it. He remembered that rod at an early age. But he also knew that health would disappear. And being a follower of Christ doesn't mean bad things won't happen to good people, because they do. Maybe that's why Ron liked this song from Patsy Cline. It says, I'm weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. And the second verse is, when my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to thy kingdom's shore, to thy shore. When you hear that song play, remember he got that faith at a young age, and it carried him through all the travails of a serviceman, a police officer, a father, a grandfather, and a treasurer to his very last day. May we have that kind of faith that is the foundation for everything we do. And today we're here to celebrate Ron, who had that faith.
Just a closer walk with thee. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Just a closer walk. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Just a closer walk. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely on to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Just a closer walk. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Just a closer walk. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Just a closer walk with thee.
Kevin, thank you very much for all those wonderful stories, and there we go. I'm all wired up here. It's amazing. I will tell you, this is kind of a funny little story. Mom doesn't like Patsy Cline. And she tells a story that she doesn't like country music at all, so she's kind of inflexible about these things. But they'd sit down to do the church treasury work, and Dad would put Patsy Cline on because he liked having music on. And finally one day Mom said, "Could we listen to something else, please?" But anyway, he loved those two songs, and that's why they're included in the celebration of life today. So despite the fact that Mom can't stand country music, she said Dad grew up on it. She said when we go to Kentucky, we knew when we get to about Corbin, there was nothing else but country all the rest of the way. And in those days, you didn't have a CD player or a disc or satellite radio or anything else, so they'd listen to country music the rest of the way down to Harlan. So Mom's kind of stoic in a way too, in case you don't know that. So I don't want to belabor everything because so many wonderful things have been said about Dad, but I do want to just tell you a few kind of humorous anecdotes. So at least this part won't be too tedious, I hope. But one of those funny anecdotes, a couple of years ago, my wife Emily spent a lengthy amount of time debating with Dad the different purposes and value of donuts. And Dad was a big fan of a place here in Martinsville called Knead the Dough, Long's Donuts. I mean, Emily could go on and on about donuts and sweets and all kinds of other things that my expanding waistline shouldn't hear. And we were on the drive home that night, and she goes, I've just been sitting here thinking I've been talking donuts with a retired cop. And she's like, surely he's a bigger expert than I am. And my buddy Dave Miller sitting back there, who's retiring from IMPD in a few days, knows what I'm talking about. Some of you may or may not know, back when I was 16, started driving and got my freedom, so to speak, I had a stalker. And I would come out of various places. It didn't matter where. I could be down at College Mall in Bloomington. I could be in Greenwood. I could be at work at the Dairy Queen or at Wendy's. I'd come out, and I had an abandoned car sticker from the state police on the side of my car. And it was always timed and dated, usually about 15 minutes before I got out there, so I never caught the culprit. And I would come home and I'm like, Dad, what the heck's going on? And he'd just kind of shrug and laugh and smile and whatever. That group of troopers back in those days were as thick as thieves. And I can tell you to this day, I still do not know who was doing that. I suspect a conspiracy. I think it had to be more than one. I think they were doing it to me. It just had a little smiley face, and you'd have the date and time and everything on it. It'd be, pasted right there on the window. And my friends would crack up because I'm like, oh my gosh, And I remember it happened at Greenwood Park Mall. It happened at College Mall. It happened. I mean, I could be out on a date. I would go out to my car, and there's an abandoned car sticker on it. And anyway, the one lesson, multiple lessons maybe it taught me. One was that there were people who were keeping an eye on me, and so I was always very good. I tried to be good at least. Jeff, don't disagree with me now. But the second thing it also taught me was that there were people looking out for me. So, do you know who was doing that? After all this years? This is a secret she's going to take to the grave. I will never know who these guys were. I suspect Ron Malin, Rod Catter, and a bunch of other guys. But anyway, that's for another day. We'll talk about that. I will tell you, Dad was not always the best navigator. For all of his years working the road, these were the days before GPS, but not always the best navigator. And we had some famous times getting lost on family vacations. One of which was in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I just got to recount this because it was kind of humorous. Finally, after driving around for half an hour, and my friend Dean Robertson, who was with us at the time and in the car, was reminding me of this at the visitation the other night. We'd been driving around, we were going in circles. It's like, hey, we've seen that place before. Hey, we've seen that place before. Finally, Dad said, okay, I'll stop and I'll ask for directions. So the rest of us sit in the car, he goes in, he's in there. Mom finally says, you gotta go in and check on your father and see what's going on. And I go in, and I said, Dad, what's going on? And he says, the guy that works here doesn't know where the interstate is either. And finally, another patron came into the little convenience store and said, oh, it's like 3 blocks over. You just take a left out of the parking lot, go down and turn right. You'll be right on the interstate. We've been driving around Allentown. I saw more parts of Allentown, Pennsylvania. I think there's a Billy Joel song. Every time I hear it, it kind of makes me wince a little bit because I think about that night in Allentown. Simon Lena loved to play Pretty Pretty Princess with Dad. And in that game, if you're not familiar with it, as you do various things in the game, you get earrings, you get a tiara, you get a necklace, you get whatever. And they just thought it was hysterical that he would start getting decked out as Pretty Pretty Princess. And we actually have some pictures of this. Sadly, not today. Email me if you really want to see them. But they just thought it was hysterical, and Dad was such a good sport. He loved sitting down with those girls in the younger days, and he would play Pretty Pretty Princess with them, actually anything they wanted to do. In fact, Lena reminded me yesterday that she had an ongoing game of war with my father, the card game, and she always won. And she's like, I don't know if Pops was letting me win or what. And I said, well, one lesson I learned from him early on, it's the same lesson I passed on to you. I never catch any slack on the games. If you won fair and square. It wasn't like I let you win. It wasn't doing anything to artificially inflate your sense of worth. When you won fair and square. And when you lost, I was just like he was. He'd be like, I won. And he had that sense of humor. I should mention I took Dad to show and tell. 1 year in school. Not a lot of people did that. I think I was a first grader, and so he comes walking in. He was in his full uniform. He had his hat on, everything else, and the teacher's like, "Oh, it's Ron's show and tell." And it's just like, "Tell us about your dad." And I remember sinking down in my seat, just so incredibly shy and so incredibly bashful. And he was such a good sport about it. Because he's like, well, let me tell you about, the uniform and about this and about what I do. And he went on, and it was a fabulous show and tell. It's something that people who were in that first grade class even still remember today. I had somebody the other day that mentioned to me, they're like, you remember that time you brought your dad to show and tell? Yes, I do. It was Sonny Gano, actually, that was telling me. Bob had mentioned that too, Bob Gano, who was in that first grade class. There was another year. Christmas at our house was always a lot of fun. We've got pictures. It was a common gift to get underwear. And sometimes kind of racy underwear, and it was funny. I got some pictures of Uncle Terry and Debbie. I actually sent some pictures to them that we scanned the other night, and Uncle Terry's daughter Amanda, my cousin, said, who is that with the underwear on her head? And I said, that's your mother. And she's like, oh. And I said, yes, we used to have a lot of fun at Miller Christmases. One year, Dad got Mom, I think it was 4 complete outfits. Had a vest, slacks, blouse, whole 9 yards. And he was fastidious. He rapped and he put little code numbers on them so that she'd open them in order because he didn't want to give away the true import of it. During the course of the evening, things got messed up. And Mom wound up opening one piece of one piece of another, one piece of another, one piece of another. And pretty soon she knew she had 4 complete outfits from all the packages that were left. And Dad was so upset. He was like, I can't believe I messed this thing up. We went on a cruise together. Dad and I played blackjack. And we had such a good time. It was so much fun. And we got to a point, he was sitting there and he goes, well, I'm pretty well tapped out. I'm done. I said, no, here. I shoved over a stack of chips and we kept playing. And we were just having such a good time. We were sitting there talking, having a good conversation, whatever. And for whatever reason, I was just winning like crazy and he was losing like crazy. So I kept pushing chips over. And he's like, you don't have to do that. At the end of the night, I think it was about $200 up and he was busted. But we sat there for 3 hours and just had the most fun. I can't begin to tell you. And there are a few other things that I'll kind of mention, but I have to tell you, this last illness was really rough on all of us. It was very much an emotional roller coaster. It was up and down. The doctors kept talking about, we'll get you out of here, and you go home, and all that kind of stuff. And that went on for a couple of weeks. And we finally hit the point where they said, well, he's really not going to get any better, which was hard news to get. But last Tuesday, I went to the hospital and I got there before Mom, because Mom takes a little while to kind of get there in the morning, get moving and all that. And of course, she's up until 2 and 3 in the morning, which means when I call at midnight or 1 o'clock, she really answers the phone. It's kind of funny. But on Tuesday, I went to the hospital and I was there a couple hours before her, and I was just sitting there with Dad, and I was talking to him and holding his hand, and he was squeezing my hand and everything else, but that was about it. And Mom walks into the room. It was about 1:30 in the afternoon. She walks into the room and she says, hey, sweetie, I'm here. And his eyes perked open, and he turns his head and he leans over because he's ready for a kiss. And he puckered up. And they did a few kisses and everything, and then he just settled back on the pillow and closed his eyes and had this big smile on his face. And I said, wow, I didn't get that kind of reaction. I've been here for 2 hours. It was very sweet, but it was very symbolic of what 59 years has been. They were always like that. And wow. So I would just say, in closing, for my little piece of all this, and gratefully I haven't blubbered a whole lot because I really ugly cry when I cry. Emily can attest to that. There were a number of miracles in Dad's life, and some things that I really wanted to point out. The first one was his marriage to Mom. He was very lucky to have found her. They were very lucky to have been together. I actually, it's probably going to surprise a lot of you, but a counselor that I saw for a while actually told me once, she said, your parents, oddly enough, really did you a disservice, because here you are, an adult, you're 50-some years old, and you don't know how to resolve conflict. Your parents didn't model anything for you. They never fought, they never argued. And here at age 53 or 54, whatever it was at the time, I'm sorry, I can't remember anything. She said, you're trying to figure this stuff out, and you don't have any skills in this area. And I said, I'm a lawyer. And she goes, not the same. So they did kind of do me that disservice, but that marriage in my eyes was the most idyllic and happy thing that you could imagine. I'm sure there were some others in intervening years, to be sure. He had a guardian angel watching over him. I'm convinced from all those years working the road and being a police officer. When they detected prostate cancer at 57, it was from a newfangled test they called a PSA test. The cancer that he had was very aggressive. It was not readily detectable by other means at the time. It was the PSA test that really identified it. And as a result, he got treated early, had surgery, didn't have to do chemo or radiation, essentially was cured by the surgery, and that remarkable little PSA test. So man, if you're not getting the PSA test, Dad's been making me get one since I was 40, which the doctor said, well, it's not really called for. But since your father had this at a younger age, he was 57, I've been doing that just for me and to make Dad happy and not hound me about it because he did that. His second round of cancer in his lung was actually detected as a result of an injury he sustained in a water gun fight. Slipped on wet grass while he was running around the yard. Now, that was on him, admittedly. We were having a blast, but he slipped in some wet grass. Thought he pulled a muscle, and then Mom kept saying, no, I think you need to go into the hospital. You need to get this checked out. I think maybe you've broken a rib or something because he's in excruciating pain. And they were fortunate enough to go to the hospital, and there was no x-ray tech on duty. So they did a CT scan that covered his whole abdomen, and in doing so, they discovered that he had lung cancer. They probably would not have found it otherwise, and that would have been a devastating thing. So, in some ways, and I reminded him later, I said, despite all the discomfort and everything he'd been through, that water gun fight when I got you with the hose that day and you fell was really kind of a good thing for you. I don't know that he or Mom agreed with that, but he was still doing water gun fights with us, so what can I say? That first round of cancer that he had did not go well. Unfortunately, the care that he received at the hospital that he was at was not good. And a whole bunch of mistakes, a whole bunch of errors they made. And we had him transferred to St. Francis. And I will never forget the doctor that took his care, Dr. Shawa, who has been a friend of my family's now ever since this day. But he examined Dad, and he came out, and I was there at the nurse's station, and I was just a mess. I was just a total mess, as I will be in just a minute as I continue talking about this. And he said to me, he said, I understood that they were bringing me a sick man. Your father's not a sick man. He had blood clots. They weren't letting him get out of bed. He had blood clots in both legs, both lungs. His heart rate was going crazy. They were bringing the crash cart down to his room because his heart was stopping and everything else. This doctor, after we transferred him to St. Francis, said, he's not a sick man. We're going to have him up walking tomorrow. And he's going to be fine. I deal with sick people. He's not sick. He's fine. And he was absolutely right. We went the next day. They had shaved him. They cleaned him up. He's like, oh my gosh, they had me walking around the nurse's station already. I made like 3 laps down the hall. And he made a remarkable recovery. He wound up being in, I think, for 28 more days, wasn't it? Because he did have a heart arrhythmia that had developed at the other hospital and had to have a pacemaker and blah, blah, blah. It just went on and on. But the cancer, actually, he did well, and that to me was a miracle. And to be honest, and no offense, Kevin, but that's what led me to convert to Catholicism, because I made some promises I had to keep. Figured a Catholic hospital did all that. I could do it. Third round of cancer was another miracle, although it didn't seem so at the time. He wound up with an inoperable tumor right here in his sternum. It was blocking his bronchial passages. And the same doctor, Dr. Shawa, who dealt with sick people, took Mom and I aside in a room and he said, I don't think Ron's going to survive this. And we had that kind of, oh my gosh moment. And he said, but let's get some people who are specialists in this. He said, let's kind of see what we can do. And it turned out the team of doctors they put together, Dr. Sharma, Dr. Eaton, and a whole host of others that I've forgotten by now. They said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you the maximum dose of radiation that we're allowed to do, and we're going to give you the maximum chemotherapy we're allowed to do. We think you might be strong enough to handle it. And basically, they didn't really say this, but if the treatment doesn't kill you, we'll see how things work. Well, the treatment worked. The tumor shrank, and they actually declared Dad. It was not an easy road, I'm telling you. His esophagus was seared on the inside. He couldn't eat or drink. Just went through tremendous turmoil in a year. I think it was a whole year this thing lasted. It was just awful. But at the end of it all, they said the tumor shrank. There's no evidence of anything spreading, and so we're gonna call you cured. And how long ago was that last round, Mom? I just can't remember. 2015. Yeah. So 2015. When this final round of cancer was diagnosed, Dad said he thought he had one more miracle left to me. Sadly, he didn't. So, in some ways, I will just say, it was a very sad and undramatic end for a man who had done so much for so many. There's no question that he was a hero, he was a role model. As Kevin mentioned, he was a man of integrity, he was a man of faith, he was a man of devotion. He was, I guess Mom could disagree, but he was a wonderful husband. He was a wonderful father. He was a good friend to so many. And in so many ways, he touched so many lives. And he left his mark. I think Mom said at one point, he asked her, I think it might have even been in his last hospitalization, that he just worried that his life hadn't meant anything. And she said, oh no, that's not the case. It's been a lot. So in closing, that's what I got. He was a great guy. He was my hero. And I know there's some folks who would like to say a few remarks. I know we're running really long, and I'm sorry. There's going to be a great feast back there. I've been smelling it since I've been here, and it's killing me, frankly. Simon, Lena, did you guys want to say anything? Okay, come on up. Here's the microphone. Since we're webcasting, we'll have folks come up if you can. If you can, I'll bring you the microphone. But come on up. This is my daughter, Leanna, who is taller than me. Yeah. Go ahead. Yep, right there.
I'm not going to say very much, so I'll probably start crying. But I know Dad mentioned a couple things, but I'll say them again because they were important and I remember them. So when I was little, Dad already mentioned this, but there was a game called War, and it was a card game. It was really funny because I would bring cards with me every time I knew I would see O-Pops, and I'd pull them out in front of him and ask him if he wanted to play War. He would always get a really big smile on his face, and he would tell me, okay, yes, let's play a game of War. So I actually am undefeated in the game of War. And so I beat him every single time, and yeah, as Dad said, he actually didn't let me win. It's actually just like a game of luck. And so I got lucky every single time. But I can't say, I have played pool with O-Pops, and he really creamed me. So
He had some
though-
math skills, didn't he?
Oh,
Math skills.
Oh yeah, so even though I won every time at war, that was my specialty, his specialty was pool. And even on vacation when we were there a couple summers back in Tennessee, creamed me so hard. I did terrible. So that was something that I really remember, and I was always excited to play war with him. Also, every time we would go and see Opops when we were little, he always had like little $50 that he would give us, the coins. And every time I got excited because before we left, he would always hand me a couple of the $50. I still have them. And sometimes if it was like a really exciting day or something, he would give us like a full $1 or like bigger coins. And so I still have those in a box actually. I should have counted them and see how much I got, but I was always excited to get to see what he had for us that day. So also Dad mentioned that Mom and Opops always watched my volleyball games. They came to a lot of my high school games too, and every time at Cedarville, I would check my phone and they had texted in the group chat, and either way it went, they would always say, "Oh, great job, Leanna," or something along those lines. And it just meant a lot to me that they would set up their computer and watch my games. And so I knew someone was always, they were always watching. And so I'm happy that they could live stream it so that they could watch. And it just meant a lot to me. Sorry. There was also one more thing I wanted to say. Whenever we gathered, like as a family, and Mom and Opops were there, it was really funny because sometimes if somebody was doing something funny or there was something happening, I would look over at Opops and we'd make eye contact, and we would just smile at each other because we would be sitting there like quietly while other people were talking, and we kind of knew what each other was thinking. What each of us were thinking, and it was always funny to go and talk to him afterwards and be like, "Oh, were you thinking the same thing I was?" And he would always nod and smile and chuckle with me. So he definitely had the best, quiet, observant face, and I think I got a lot of that from him. So, yeah. And I know that he's not here with us, but I know that he's looking over us now, and I'm hopeful because one day we'll get to see him again. So,
Amen.
That's it. That was just a few things.
Sorry. Yeah.
So, I made no cards because I'm not good at public speaking, but Dad and Lane already got me crying, so so where do I even start? So one of the best memories I have is Opops giving me a tin of Buckeyes for Christmas, every Christmas, and I think that fueled my addiction for chocolate that I still struggle with today. I will always miss having those Buckeyes. And then, like Dad said, we did play Pretty Princess. He was so patient. We could pretty much put makeup on him, we could put jewelry on him, and he would just, he was so manly, but he really just let us give him makeovers as much as we wanted to, which was kind of crazy. And I do remember when they first got their Kia, that's around the time when I started driving, and he trusted me enough to, I sat in the driver's seat and I would drive, and there's something that I remember to this day. Every time when I get to a red light, I think of his basically his quote, he said, so try not to stop suddenly on the white line. You want to cruise up to the red light. And that was probably after I gave him the whiplash like 50 times. I felt really bad. But he was so patient. He never got mad. He never got upset. He never raised his voice. So that was great. Another big thing was that Pops was an IU fan, and then I went to Purdue. So I converted him. I don't know fully, but if I fully converted him, but he did put a Purdue sticker on his car, which you guys still have on the back of your window. And they did come visit me when I was at school, which was really special. They, even walking around campus, they would hold hands. They were just always really sweet. And we would catch up over coffee, and then I also remember video chatting them on Skype, and I'd basically be talking to their foreheads. But it was really special that I was able to talk to them like that. I tried to get them to angle their laptop higher, but it's okay. It was pretty funny. And then even though, so I was still in school when I had Zaida, and even though we were kind of farther away, I remember they drove up to see her and to hold her. And every time that he would see my kids, he would hold them and look at them. And I have pictures, just the look on his face and his smile. It was really special. He even came when I lived in Noblesville. Both of them, because they're inseparable, but both of them came to Noblesville and climbed the 50 billion stairs to get to my apartment. They're just always there for any volleyball games, swim meet, band concert, Latvian dance festival, anything. They were there supporting me. So another thing that I remember is I always pretty much look exhausted, and I look like an electrocuted rodent. And I'm always stressed out, but every time he'd walk past me, he would kind of massage my shoulders a little bit. And it would put me to sleep. It was really nice. But that was just a really good memory. Well, in his last week at St. Francis, I kept trying to massage his feet, but he wouldn't let me. And I told him that I wouldn't charge. I would give him a discount, but he said, I guess he didn't say, but he would nod his head no. But I don't know. I know that people aren't perfect, but he and Omom are the closest to perfect. I don't know anybody else that's that perfect. So, and no matter what stupid decisions I made in life, and they've always been there for me. And our pops has always been just really patient and supportive no matter what. He never, I don't know, like he always made me feel beautiful, and he always made me feel like he was proud of me. So no matter what I did, he never raised his voice. He was just amazing.
Jack, do you want me to bring the mic to you?
Kevin, thank you so much. Chip, thank you so much. My name's Jack Cashman. I was in the Navy at the same time Ronnie was. Actually, I was a little earlier. We met in 1960. We were both the mailmen for our respective destroyers. And we got to know each other pretty well. Actually, it was kind of ironic. There were 7 ships in our squadron. And out of 7 ships, 3 of the mailmen were from Indianapolis. So what are the coincidences of that? But we stayed in touch. Matter of fact, I was invited to their wedding, which I attended. And from then, just various stories. Over the years, my wife Judy and I have celebrated 3 vacations with Ronnie and Phyllis. We first went to New England years ago, probably in the late 90s. Then I went on, I had to go on a train trip with him. Judy was supposed to, but our son-in-law was injured in a truck accident. And then a number of years ago, not too long ago, we also went on a cruise together. So we've stayed pretty close over the years. We visit each other a couple times a year. They come to Ohio. We live in a suburb of Columbus, and we come over here to visit with them. The first thing I was going to share is with Chip. Many, many years ago, when he was still little, and I was in his patrol car, and the 3 of them headed to downtown Martinsville. Of course, they had the information on the console. And Chip reached over and pushed one of the buttons and would flip one of the switches, and it happened to be the siren.
I do not remember that. But thank you for bringing that up.
Another one, Phyllis's mom had a farm someplace south of town here, I believe. Anyway, Ronnie had my handgun, his service revolver, I think 1 rifle. And then we were just about done, and Ronnie pulled out a Saturday Night Special. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of them, but they're handguns that have no rifling in the barrel. So when the bullet comes out, it basically just tumbles. So we had set up about a 30-inch square corrugated box with targets on it. We were changing it a couple times to take them on. And we started shooting. We were about from here maybe to where the photographer is in the middle of the aisle here. And he was shooting. And he said, I said, you're not hitting the target. So he walked about halfway up. Still not hitting the target, hit the dirt. He had to get within about 10 feet of that box before he could even hit the target. That's how off they were. So they would be good at close range only. One other time that Ron shared that tested his patience a bit, when he was patrolling I-65, but it was before it was completed, he was chasing a speeder. The guy was going to give him a run for his money and thought he could outrun him. Well, the barrel and pulled off on 231, and the guy finally realized he was fighting a losing battle, so he pulled up and stopped. And just as he did, Ronnie got a flat tire in his patrol car. So he went up, got the guy's license, went back to his patrol car, set it down in the seat, proceeded to change his tire the whole time while the guy sat there. And then he gave him a ticket and let him go his way. So his patience got tested there every now and then. So that's about all I got to share with you all today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Do you want me to bring the mic to you? Yep, we can do that. It makes for good television. There you go.
Now, this is my cheat sheet. Oh, yes, I do. I don't can't see. Oh, now it's not that anything. Anyway, these are my best memories of mine. Okay, here. Okay, these are my memories of Ronnie. And, you know, like Kevin said, my ex and I are the ones Phyllis and Ronnie were together. And we double dated. And oh boy, we had some fun trips, but I'm not going to even go into it. But we did some, I thought I was doing something. Anyway, so, when Phyllis and Ronnie lived in Columbus, Indiana, Ronnie had this big front yard. He had a riding lawnmower. And so I had gone up to stay with Phil for 2 weeks while she had Chip. And so she was asleep and so was Chip. So I went out to the front and I said, Ronnie, can I help do something? He says, well, yeah, would you like to finish mowing the yard? I'm like, well, yeah. And I said, well, so since I knew how to drive, I knew how to do the lawnmower. Except for one thing. I didn't know how to stop the darn thing. So I would come around, because I got done mowing the yard, and I'd come around and I'd say, Ronnie, how do I stop this lawnmower? He just shrugged his shoulders. And so I'd just go around the yard again, thinking, what am I going to do? How can I stop it? So maybe I'll run out of gas. So I came around again and I said, Ronnie, how do I stop this lawnmower? Once again, shrugged his shoulders, around the yard again. So finally, the third time I came around, by then I was getting really aggravated. And I was thinking, I'm not running out of gas. So finally I said, Ronnie, no. How do I stop this darn thing? He said, take your foot off the gas. I was ready to kill, and Ronnie ran in the house. So, and then another time, he got a camera. He bought a new camera. And it was a fall festival in Martinsville. You're going to all remember this. You don't know because you weren't there. You weren't even thought of. But anyway, oh gosh. Anyway, so we were, Marcia, my younger sister, and I, and Ronnie were just kind of pounding around, and Ronnie was going around taking pictures of everything in Martinsville. So then we went back to where everybody was sitting, Art and everybody, Phyllis, and Phyllis kept saying, what's that smell? It smelled like dog food. And so, we kept saying, we don't know. So then Ronnie went somewhere. I can't always want to take pictures or something. He came back, and when he came back, there came that smell. So Phyllis kept saying, okay, everybody, check your shoes. Well, Ronnie had it on his shoes, and it was so bad, it was stuck inside the cleats of the shoe, like a tire on a car. And guess what? Those shoes went home and sat in the garage for a year, didn't they? Until I think you went and cleaned them up, and then you wore them. But your dad never did touch them again. I'm almost done. I really am. And then, let's see. Oh, yes, the day of Ronnie's retirement. Marcia and I did pull pranks on Ronnie constantly. We would tell him jokes. We would do arcade things because Ronnie got embarrassed so easy, and his face would just go red. So, Marcia would come up with some bad jokes, and we'd get together and say, Ronnie, I got a joke to tell you. And by then, he knew he was in trouble. So, the day of his retirement, Luann and Marcia and I go into the house, and Ronnie said to us three, you better not do anything to embarrass me, or you will be in so much trouble. Well, we knew he was just saying that. So anyway, at the retirement, it was really super neat, wasn't it? It was a real neat retirement. And so everybody was congratulating Ronnie and telling him how great everything was. So when everybody stopped and Ronnie was standing up there by himself, Marcia said, okay, let's walk up and just say, hey, Ronnie. So the three of us were probably where Margaret's sitting and probably where Ronnie was standing. We started walking toward Ronnie, and Ronnie's eyes kept going, oh my God, what are these girls going to do to me? So we walked up there, and very slowly, we stood in front of him, and we said, Ronnie, we love you. Congratulations. And he was almost ready to cry because he thought we were going to really do something bad to him. So, that's it. That's it.
Uncle Terry, did you want to say something?
Ronnie was always more than a brother-in-law. He was an older brother, a role model, and a beloved friend. We played softball together. We bowled together. Tennis. Well, tennis was, it's kind of like golf. The game that we played only resembled golf in the fact that we used the same kind of dimple ball and crooked sticks everybody else did, but it was really a really nice walk in the woods. He is, as a role model, he was the reason when I won the only lottery I've ever won in my life, which was the first draft lottery. I enlisted in the Navy. He was always there as an encourager and a dear friend. And I truly miss him. Thank you.
Although I have to tell you, you told a story once about the ice cream machine on the Ranger going down, and Dad said, "You had ice cream on an aircraft carrier?" And you said, "Well, of course we did."
Yeah.
And he said, "We don't have anything like that on a destroyer."
Well, we had other things on aircraft carriers that they didn't have on destroyers. Interestingly enough, I had enlisted in the Navy to avoid Vietnam, and my older brother got to experience with the U.S. Army. 3 years later, I found myself in Yankee Station supporting aircraft that were flying combat missions into Vietnam. I got to ride several times with your father.
Mm-hmm.
One time I will remember, kind of goes to the nature of the person he was, his ability to work with people and treat people with respect and in a firm and very professional manner. We were out on State Road 37, just north of Martinsville, sitting where Old 37 connects on a warm summer night. And a car stopped probably about 3/4 of a mile south of where we were sitting. And I said, "Oh, it looks like the car's broken down from the heat." And he says, "Well, let's just sit here and wait and see if they get it going." Well, they did get it going, and it went about as far north of the intersection as it had been south and pulled over. And he goes, "Well, that's not right." So he pulled out, and we pulled in behind him, and this vehicle has got busted back window and plastic over it, so you really can't see what's going on. But by the way the car was gyrating, you knew something was going on in there, just not what for sure what was going on. Ronnie walked up to the driver's side, and what he reported later is, as soon as he walked up there, the young lady sitting behind the wheel turned to him and said, "I don't have a driver's license." By this time, the door opened on the passenger side, and this kid come rolling out, and it was all he could do to stand. So your father got him around behind the car, talking to him. He and his wife had been celebrating their anniversary, and he kind of overdid it. So your dad gives him the sobriety test and has him stand there with his arms out and his head back and closes his eye. And if your father hadn't caught him, he would have made it right into the back of the car where the plastic was. So your father talked to him and his wife, said, "Hey, I'm going to be out here patrolling the rest of the night, so I'll kind of watch after you, make sure everything's okay. Crawl in the back seat, sleep it off. Tomorrow morning when you're detoxified, drive on home." Okay, officer. So we took off north, cut back around 37, came back to stop where we were. Probably sat there 20 minutes. The car started up and took off. Well, Ronnie just immediately pulled out, and we're in the fast lane. He's just kind of easing up, and he said, "If I can tell it's her driving," he says, "I'm just going to let her go." About this time, the car crossed the center line into the fast lane and then back across, and he goes, "Nah, ain't going to work." So turned on the lights, pulled him over, arrested the young man, handcuffed him, put him in the backseat of the patrol car. Unfortunately, put his wife in there with him. And all the way to Morgan County Jail, I got to listen to this poor kid being berated by his wife, saying, "This man gave you every opportunity, and you blew it.
That's exactly right.
You deserve whatever they do to you." It was horrible. Another one that came to mind, and I guess me riding with her father I was probably his unlucky charm. He was needing to go qualify at their night shooting range over in Putnamville, and had his unmarked car, and both of us are dressed in kind of casual clothing in an unmarked car, and went up 39, and as soon as 135, and as soon as we pulled on the state US 40, this van come blowing by us. I mean, just boom, nearly took the paint off the car. Well, your father immediately accelerated to get pursuit. And he's in an unmarked car and in plain clothes, and he says, "I can't stop him." So he's on the radio trying to find support. And all this time, we're flying along, and I keep seeing the van getting away from us. And we would kind of catch up, and then he would kind of pull away from us. I talked to your father later about that, and I said, "How come you were kind of letting him get a lead?" And he says, "I didn't." He said, "I had my foot to the floor." They were just running us. But we got into Brazil, Indiana. That's how far we chased him. And fortunately, a Brazil policeman that was completely oblivious to what was going on came around an intersection at the same time this guy was about to jackrabbit it, and he figured he was pinned in and hit it to the curb. And kind of the funny part of that was the driver of this was probably about 5'9", maybe weighed 130 pounds wet. And we took him to the lockup there in Brazil, and we're sitting in the booking with him. So there was your father, another state policeman about his size in uniform, and myself sitting there. And this young man stood up with handcuffs behind him with the intention that he was going to get physical. And then three of us stood up, and he probably had the most lucid moment in his life, and he said, "That probably wouldn't be a good idea, would it?" But yes, your father, if he was worried that he didn't make an impression, he was a terrific guidance in my life. It was very well. And I'm blessed to have it. Absolutely. And
I'm trying to think. Every time I went to El Paso, my mom's house, he would like smile a little. We watched movies. When I came to the hospital, I was like, this isn't what I imagined the rooms to be like. And then when I came in and I saw him, I was like, oh, I wish he was awake. And then, like, a half an hour later, Laura came in with the food. And so, we were eating.
Guess had a good time, didn't you? How'd you guys? Did you say good time?
I was an exception for like a long time.
For the hospital visitation?
Yeah. And I got to see him. So that was the best part of my day.
I'll try to make this short. I'm going to take some of you back to your childhood or your teen days. The year was 1959. I was either 4 or 5, depending on what kind of a year it was. And my sister was just a year older than I was. Well, being the youngest, why, we got to check out the guys that came to date our older sisters. Some of them we didn't quite care for. Others we knew because they were neighborhood friends, and they just would take my sisters out on a date. But one day, or one evening, this tall, dark-haired, brown-eyed, good-looking guy come walking in the door. And me and my sister, we looked at him. He's sitting on the couch. Thought, this guy's not bad. He looks pretty good. So we went and grabbed whatever storybook was popular at the time, either Sleeping Beauty or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 101 Dalmatian, or I think Pinocchio had just come out. So we'd climb up, one on either side of Ron, and we make him read to us until Phyllis was ready to go out on a date. So he got a good start on taking care of small kids whenever he was dating my sister, because we had him reading to us every time he came to the house. But he was always the person I called if I had any problems with my computer. And I'll make this kind of brief. I have a cat named Sassy, and when she was smaller, I would take her and put her in my lap. Well, sometimes she'd get up on my keyboard on my computer. Well, I'd grab her fast enough to where she didn't do anything to it. But one night I wasn't fast enough. And I don't know what keys she hit when she got up there. But my screen turned completely upside down. Everything was upside down. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't know what. So what did you hit? You know, of course, the cat's not going to tell me. So anyway, I made an emergency call to Ronnie, and I said, do you know what I could do to get my screen to turn back around? And he says, Luke, what'd you do? He said, well, Sassy decided she's going to run across my keyboard. And I said, now I can't. I said, everything's upside down. And he says, well, tell you what, let me check and I'll call you back. So about 10, 15 minutes later, he says, okay, Luke, you need to hit this key and hit this key at the same time. And he said, that should turn it back around. And I said, oh my gosh, Ron, it worked. And he says, and do one more thing. And I said, what's that? He says, keep Sassy off the keyboard. I said, okay. But,
I add one more thing?
No.
No.
That's fine. Go ahead.
This is very short. Anyway, I picked on Ronnie. And my husband, my dear sweet husband, came up with the idea of starting to send birthday cards to Ronnie. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
So one year, and I cannot remember what birthday it was. Maybe his 50th. I don't remember. Anyway, we started sending him cards the 25th of July. So Ronnie could get a card every day until his birthday, the 25th of August. Some of the cards were kind of, but anyway, so Phil, we were talking and she said, okay, Ronnie just loved these cards he got today, but we cannot put them up because we never know when Reverend Abel's going to come. And we don't want Norman to see these cards. But you know, I don't know what to do because I have lost my buddy, my friend that I could torment. And I sent him birthday cards every year, and not more than one, but several. And this August is going to be horrible for me.
Uncle Art, you want to say something? You don't have to, but
to iterate what everybody else has said, I can't remember a time that I didn't call Ron and Phil and they would come and help. I remember times that I've been in the hospital and Phyllis and Ron would be there almost every day to see how I'm doing. I've got not one good memory, but this is going to embarrass my sisters.
good. All the better.
But one weekend, Phyllis and Ronnie, Peg and Mike, we was all at the farm, and either Ronnie or Mike decided to want to go wading in Coons Creek. And he said, do you know how to get there? And I said, yeah, I know how to get there. So we went down through the woods and down to the creek, and we're wading and having a time. Well, this snake come up and was making laps around Peggy's legs and Phyllis's legs, and Peggy yelled out, there's a snake. And the men, as gallant as we are, took 2 steps and we was back on the bank. And they're still in the water with the snake going around their legs. Huh? Yes, he was. He was like a brother to me. And like I said, I don't know. I remember in '68, I had appendicitis attack, and Terry took me to the hospital. And by the time I got there, my appendix had busted. And for, I don't know if it was a week or if it was longer, but anyhow, they had to sedate me because I kept pulling an IV out of my arm. And the doctors told Phyllis later that I had a 50-50 chance of pulling through. And this was right after I got out of the service. And I remember one weekend I went over to stay with Phyllis and Ronnie, and you was just a baby. And Ron come in for supper, and after he eats supper, he asked if I wanted to go with him on patrol. And I said yes. And I got in the car and closed the door and buckled up, and he said, now if I get in trouble, will you help me? And I said, you best believe it.
Great memory. Lorraine? Do you want me to bring the mic to you, or? Okay.
You know, when you get our age, you get up and go, got up and went. I haven't found it yet. Several things came to me. The Lord gave me something a couple days ago, and I just wanted to share it with you. And after hearing the stories and so forth, life is something else, isn't it? We've been friends with Ronnie and Phil over 50 years. We used to have a service station. It was the only, in the 1970s, it was the only filling station between I-465 and Bloomington. And so we got to know a lot of state troopers. And then Phyllis and I became good friends when we were taking classes in Bloomington. But this is something that I would like to share. What is a family? Author Edith Schaefer in the 1970s and 80s, I had the privilege through BSF to hear Edith Schaefer and her husband speak in Indianapolis. They were from Switzerland. She described family. If you'll all just close your eyes for a moment and visualize a baby in a crib. As she began to speak, reality set in. With eyes closed for a moment, just visualize that picture of a baby. I can think of Chip off the old block. And picture a mobile attached to the crib. I don't know if they make those anymore or not. A mobile is a moving, changing collection of objects, constantly in motion, yet within the framework of the form. The framework of a family gives form, but as one starts with a man and a woman, a mother and father, there is never any one day following another when these two plus the children that come through adoption to birth or birth into the home are either the same age or at the same point of growth. Every individual is growing, changing, developing, or declining, intellectually, growing spiritually, physically, and psychologically. A family is a grouping of individuals who are affecting each other intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, physically, psychologically. No 2 years, no 2 months, or no 2 days is there the exact same blend or mix within the family, as each individual person is changing. In life, we can become a part of a family, whether through church or in our profession of law enforcement, in the medical field, or as a rescue worker. A sort of family is formed in an area of neighbors or a lunch bunch. A sort of family is formed. What is a family? A family is immobile. A family is an art form. A family is an exciting art career because an art form needs work. In relationships, there is transformation. When we turn to the Bible, we find many stories and personalities God has provided to help us grow spiritually. Habakkuk was a prophet. The nation of Israel was in trouble. God sent Habakkuk forward and told him to write it down so others could run with it. And out of the blue, he wrote it down. In the New Testament, Jesus provided us with the Gospels. Mark 4 from the Message tells us that Jesus was never without a story. Through the parables, he taught his disciples about people and how to live in the world. Jesus came to save, not to condemn. Jesus taught us that the law of love was needed along with the law of religion. Ron and Phyllis were mentors to many friends and children in life relationships. And they didn't forget the little children as they got older. For the last few years, their last voluntary work was with weekday religious education. They sometimes, working behind the scenes, worked in the coldest Indiana weather, rain or snow, to walk those little ones from school to weekday classes. You might call them silent disciples at times. As I read the obituary, the word integrity stuck out at me. What is integrity? It's what you do when nobody's looking. What is the family God created? A family is a mobile. A family is an art form. An exciting art career because an art form needs work. It's a transformation experience through life. The Bible says we are surrounded by a great crowd of witnesses. Witnesses in the book of life. Through it all, in Ron's journey, he persevered. He overcame. There are stories behind the stories, but we shall meet again, and we shall overcome too, as we watch, wait, and walk forward. A wonderful life. Thank you for it.
One more quick comment from Amanda, who forgot something, and then we are going to have lunch.
When I came into the hospital to see Bo Pops, I saw him, and the first thing I did was hug Mom. And then she asked me if I wanted to sit by him, and I held his hand. And then I nodded my head. And then I held on to his hand for a while, and then Laura came in and got the food, and we ate. And then I came back, right again, and then my mom came over a few minutes later. His hands were really swollen. He was a good man, and he had a kind heart.
Amen.
I don't think I could say anything else better than that. I think we've got one last song from Bill Barker, Amazing Grace, which we saved till the end because there's no way I could do anything after that.
Love